Thank you for listening to me about us listening to you at our virtual learning tour here. Um, as Lane introduced, SOC is a quiet, small committee that occasionally asks the entire college to do stuff. And so as we were talking amongst ourselves about our mission and how we proceed, we decided that it wasn't a good model for us in the SOC committee to decide how the rest of the college is going to do assessment. That's not how things work at MCC. Nor is it a good idea for our committee to sort of see ourselves as the leader of assessment. We see ourselves as a faculty tool to assist the college in engaging in assessment. And so what we needed to do is listen to the rest of the college and ask, how can SOC better meet the needs of the college? And so we engaged in this listening tour where we went to different departments and we asked basically two questions. How do faculty describe assessment for student learning? And how can SOC foster and support student learning among faculty? I want to draw emphasis on the italicized "for" there. It's one thing to assess, to do an assessment of student learning, which is sort of drawing from students what they've learned. A more useful way to think of assessment is we're doing assessment for student learning. We want our learning, our teaching to improve as a result of that assessment process. So we went around and we asked departments these questions. How do we know what students are learning? How do you decide what to teach? And how might SOC support that practice? Within each department, we divided the department up into subgroups so that we could have small group interaction and put them into breakout groups because, it's all COVID and everything. And then we timed it. And then Megan Garvey, I need to put hats off to Megan here. She did a lot of data analysis, doing content analysis of the conversations that resulted from that. First of all, when we did a practice run of this presentation, I tried to explain how Megan had done this data, and she smiled and patted me on the head and said that was very cute. Let me do a video. And so I'm going to put this video so we can hear from Megan in her own words how we were able to assemble the documents from or the data from this. So
analysis software for this project. 55 faculty participated from 6 different departments. These participation numbers are a drop in the bucket to our total faculty at MCC. However, participation per department may have been sufficient. First, I downloaded the Google Docs from the listening tour, renamed the files per department, and uploaded the files to the software. Next, I used provisional coding to create parent codes for each of the questions in the listening tour. Then I read through all of the responses and engaged with data condensation by assigning descriptive codes to summarize the basic topic of passages in the data. The software allows the user to select each code and review the passages that make up the specific code. After the data was coded, I used the Explore tool to identify themes in the data. The hierarchy sunburst feature created an image of the higher frequency codes for each listening tour question. This tool provided insight to emerging themes across all participants. Lastly, I downloaded data sets for each department and utilized spreadsheets to calculate the sum of each code with graphs for visual representation.
Okay, I want to draw attention to the second slide that she had, which had the bucket. In fact, let me see if I can get back to their second slide here.
In vivo qualitative analysis software.
One moment here. Okay, so the bucket there with the drop, this is the proverbial drop in the bucket. And the reason is because we only were able to talk with 6 of the departments. And we know that that is just a small sampling of the departments that we have around the college. And so one reason for this presentation is to show you what we did and hopefully to make those of you who are not a member of one of these departments deeply jealous that you did not get to have this experience, so that you can talk to your department chair to schedule a time where we can come do this listening tour with your department. All right.
I use the truck version of
Stop. We got it. There we go. Okay. So when we do the coding of the content analysis of the comments that we were given, the dominant answer to the question was, on how do we know students are learning? We were happy to see that authentic assessment is how we know, is the dominant answer. That's a good answer for that. But we also have asking questions of our students, giving quizzes and exams, having the students explain course concepts back to us. These were all methods or answers to the question, how do we know what our students are learning? One thing that came out of these conversations is it reminded us of a quote from Susan Suski. The Suski book, the 2018 book, is a book that we as a SOC committee have been having kind of a book club. We read through this book to understand the theory of assessment and how assessment can be done intentionally. And she makes this great point that there is direct evidence of student learning is the kind that would convince a skeptic that students indeed have learned what they need to persist, graduate, transfer, obtain jobs, and otherwise succeed. And I like the use of the word skeptic. And when I read this, I think of my neighbors. My neighbors in my neighborhood, they are convinced that my entire day is spent watching YouTube videos, I think. They're not really sure that I actually work. And so these are the skeptics that we need to convince that we're doing our job, that we are doing what we think we're doing. We are doing what we tell our students that we are doing. That when they come to MCC, there's an implicit promise to these students of learning that will occur, and these are our institutional learning objectives. In addition to whatever specific degree that they're getting. And are we delivering on that promise of those institutional learning objectives? Assessment is part about getting the direct evidence of that learning. So as we look at the art department's responses, their modal response here is visual progress of work, which you would expect from the art department. After that comes authentic assessments and then active participation. And so one question to ask is, out of all, these are all of the response categories that the art department had. Of these, which are direct and which are indirect evidence of student learning? And we can take a minute here and you can unmute yourself and just shout out which of these would be direct and which would be indirect.
Brian, there's a question in the chat. If you could just briefly define what you are considering authentic assessments.
Well, the authentic assessment is what the faculty in the department said that they rely on to know how students are learning. And so the answer to what is an authentic assessment is probably going to be derived differently within each department, because each department has their own discipline and their own manner of assessment. So that is what they said was authentic assessment. My suspicion is what they mean by authentic is an assessment of their understanding of the course concepts or the learning objectives, as opposed to a sort of busy work attendance taking kind of assessment. But really, what counts as authentic is going to vary by department, because each department, I'm not the content expert in art, so I can't answer that question for art. What is an authentic assessment? But the people in the art department should have an answer to that, and that is a good conversation for the art department to have amongst themselves. What is an authentic assessment? So that is a great question, and it is a challenge for you to answer it yourself within your department.
And I'll just offer from an education background, authentic assessments typically would reflect realistic application of what is being learned. So application of what is being learned in a realistic type of situation. So as Brian is saying, that will vary from department to department, what would be the realistic application of the learning. And the answer to that would be the authentic assessment.
Thank you. And so using that definition that Dr. Reyes gives us, authentic assessment and visual progress of work are probably both direct evidence of student learning because there are actual artifacts or demonstrations of learning. What would be an indirect evidence of of learning on this list that the art department has come up with? Yeah, quizzes and exams. Yeah, that's good because quizzes and exams are usually good for rote, for memorization of details, but they may actually only be a proxy measure of understanding. So, yeah. All right, let's go to the next department here. Communications. Again, same question, completely different answer to that question. So here for communications, you'll notice visual progress of work is a marginally one because it's a different department now. But explaining course concepts is now the modal category, which again, you would expect in a communications department. The question that the communications department should ask themselves is, of these indicators of student learning that they listed, are these direct or indirect evidence of student learning? All right, moving over to cultural science. Again, explaining course concepts, the modal category, quizzes, exams, very important. The questions that students ask, or maybe asking students questions and listening to their answers, that could go either way. I'm not sure what they had in mind when they said that. Direct or indirect. Here's education. So Dr. Reyes was probably in the room when this was, or her colleagues anyways. Maybe you wish you were in that room these days, right? So again, explaining course concepts, the modal category, asking questions, confidence. This is one that didn't even show up in the other departments, but this is an important indicator for the education faculty of student learning is how confident are they in their craft, probably. Reading, reflective practice. And this one didn't even show up in the other departments, but it's a core skill for the reading department. And so that is the modal category. Practical application, completing their coursework. So what we see here is that each department is approaching their answer to this question, how do students learn, from their discipline-specific approach. And so the follow-up question then for each department is a conversation that department should have of whether these measures are direct or indirect. Social science, this is my department. So again, explaining course concepts, academic language use, are they throwing our political science and history jargon properly? We apparently care about that. Okay, the next question, or the next set of questions, how do you decide what to teach? And I'm pretty happy that course competencies is on there. I'm on, and I do HLC site visits, and from the HLC point of view, this is a good answer that we are actually using our course competencies when we're deciding what to teach, but also formative assessments, current issues and events, and community culture are three other sort of dominant answers to this question on how we decide what we teach. So Megan drew from her dissertation research on, for us, a way to think about this with this heart research. And her point on deciding what to teach is that we should put a priority on things that employers would like. And I know that's particularly true with community college because we do quite a bit of career um, enhancements and job skill work, but even in the transfer students, these are skills they need to get before they go on for their bachelor's degree. But employers want both career specific and transferable skills. And then the capacity to think critically, communicate clearly, and solve complex problems. The 4 C's that we have at MCC, which are our institutional learning outcomes, directly connect to those things. So, I mean, good for us. So let's look at the department's answers for this question of how do you decide what to teach? Again, each department is going to have a different flavor, a different approach to these answers. But we want to look at their answers in the context of what the heart research suggests is, are these things career specific or transferable skills? So ART is focused on course competencies and formative assessment, and then deconstruct course competencies. And honestly, I'm not sure what the ART people mean about that. But then industry practice would be a hugely important one for ART. So are they career specific or transferable skills? And industry practices would clearly be career specific. We look at communications departments. Again, course competencies and current issues are the modal categories, with, again, formative assessment for teaching being important. Now, if the communications department were to get together with a follow-up visit and ask themselves, are these career specific or transferable skills? And how does thinking of it in those terms change the way we assess and change the way we decide what we teach? Cultural science focused on academic research and course competencies. Education, course competencies, and then once you've got that done, there's quite a range of answers for education, with current issues, industry practices, student interest, instructor expertise. Reading, all of their answers could be fit into two main categories: course competencies and formative assessment. Social science, like cultural science, wants to make sure academic research is a big part of it. Okay, so let's go to the third question before we run out of time here. How can SOC support your practice? And this gets to how our committee can use these listening conversations. What we've been doing up until now is how can the fact of the conversation happened help the departments that had those conversations. Now we get to how can the SOC committee help those departments. And a lot of people would like help with learning their outcomes. Oops. I was trying to go backwards and jump forward instead. A lot of them want help with assessing. A lot of them want help with understanding the 4 Cs and how to assess in Canvas, coordinating discussion forums. This is something that we as a committee are committing to do. And in fact, this SOC showcase that we're doing is hopefully the first annual SOC showcase, as the SOC committee continues maybe each semester having forums about assessment. All right, the answers are, these are the modal answers: assessing learning, coordinating discussions, sharing data. Okay, so where do we go from here? We, as a committee, would like to follow up with departments to ask those follow-up questions. Is this direct or indirect learning? Are these career-specific skills that you're getting to help the departments think through their practice, their craft in their teaching and their assessment to help them find out within their department what the answers to those questions are. We also want to know what kinds of conversations can your department have about teaching and assessment, and how can we as a committee do that? And for those of you whose departments were not highlighted here, if you would like us to facilitate this conversation in your department, then indicate that in the chat, and we will let your department chair know that there is an interest in that, and we can schedule a departmental meeting where we can walk through these questions and answer them. So I appreciate your attention. What we're trying to do as a committee is to model how to use data to learn what has been learned and to know what we know. And that is what our SOC committee is about.